In a world where billionaires seem to operate above the law, what happens when a 22-year-old waitress decides one has finally crossed the line? This isn't a fairy tale. It's the story of Clara Lawson. A young woman armed with nothing but her integrity and the day she single-handedly took on the heir to the Thorn Empire in the middle of a busy New York diner. She expected to be fired, to be sued, to be crushed by the immense power she dared to challenge. What she never ever expected was what came next. Forget what you think you know about power and money. The real story, the one that unfolded behind closed doors and in the deafening silence of a private helicopter, is more shocking than you can ever imagine. The Gilded Spoon wasn't just a diner. It was a relic, a stubborn anchor of authenticity in the ever-changing tides of Lower Manhattan. Its checkered floors were worn from a century of footsteps. The vinyl on its booths was cracked like an old smile, and it smelled perpetually of strong coffee, sizzling bacon, and Maria's secret recipe apple pie. For Clara Lawson, it was more than a workplace. It was a sanctuary, a predictable rhythm of clattering plates and friendly chatter that stood in stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of her life outside its doors. At 22, Clara was carrying a weight far beyond her years. By day, she was a waitress, balancing orders with a grace that belied her exhaustion. By night, she was a student of architecture at Cooper Union. Her textbooks splayed across her tiny apartment, dreams of steel and glass rising from the pages. Every dollar she earned was split 3 ways: tuition rent, and the ever-growing pile of medical bills for her younger brother Liam, whose battle with a rare autoimmune disease was a silent, relentless storm in their lives. The Gilded Spoon, with its steady hours, and Maria's understanding eyes, was the one place she could breathe. That Tuesday began like any other. The lunch rush was a controlled chaos of tourists wanting a real New York experience, and regulars who had been eating at the same counter for 50 years. Clara moved through it all with unpracticed ease, her mind a complex Rolodex of who wanted their coffee black and who was allergic to onions. The bell above the door chimed, but this time it felt different. It wasn't the cheerful jingle of a regular or the curious tinkle of a tourist. It was a sharp, demanding sound, as if the door itself had been shoved open with contempt. In walked Julian Thorne. He wasn't just a customer. He was an event. Heir to the Thorne Global Properties, as fortune a name synonymous with half the skyline of New York, Julian moved with an aura of frictionless entitlement. He was handsome in a way that seemed machine-tooled perfect teeth, a jawline that could cut glass and eyes that scanned the room, not to see people, but to assess obstacles. He was flanked by 2 sycophants, Caden and Bryce, whose own expensive clothes seemed like costumes they wore to orbit his son. The diner's comfortable hum faltered. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the booths. A table. Now Julian snapped, not at anyone in particular, but at the air itself, expecting it to comply. Maria, the diner's owner, and a woman whose 60 years had taught her to spot trouble from a mile away, started to move from behind the counter. But Clara, seeing the most desirable booth, was currently occupied by an elderly couple celebrating their anniversary, stepped forward. "Welcome to the Gilded Spoon," she said, her voice even and professional. "It will be just a few minutes for a booth, but we have space at the counter right now if you'd like." Julian's eyes landed on her, and it was like being examined under a microscope. He didn't look at her. He appraised her. A slow, dismissive scan from her worn-out sneakers to the slight fraying on her apron, lingering for a moment too long on her face and chest. "I don't do counters," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. He pointed a finger adorned with a heavy gold ring at the anniversary couple. "Get them out. I want that one." Caden and Bryce snickered. Clara felt a familiar hot spark of anger ignite in her chest. It was the same anger she felt when a professor dismissed her ideas, or when an insurance agent spoke about Liam's condition in terms of costs and liabilities. "Sir, those customers were here first," she said, her tone hardening just a fraction. "As I said, it will only be a few minutes. I can get you some drinks while you wait." "Did you not hear me?" Julian took a step closer, invading her personal space. His cologne, a sharp, eye-watering scent of sandalwood and arrogance, washed over her. "I said I want that table. Your job is to make it happen. Or are you as stupid as this place looks?" From across the room, Clara saw Chloe, a younger waitress who was still in high school, watching with wide, terrified eyes. She saw Maria's hands tighten on a dish rag. She saw the happy anniversary couple now looking uncomfortable, their quiet celebration spoiled. This man wasn't just a customer. He was a poison, seeping into the atmosphere of the one place she felt safe. Clara took a small, deliberate step back, reclaiming her space. "My job is to serve customers, not to throw them out for you. You will have to wait like everyone else." For a moment, Julian looked genuinely stunned, as if a piece of furniture had just spoken back to him. The shock quickly curdled into rage. His face, usually a mask of bored superiority, flushed a deep red. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he hissed, his voice low and menacing. "I know exactly who you are," Clara replied, her voice just as quiet, but ringing with a clarity that cut through the tension. "And in here, you're just a customer. One who is being loud, disrespectful, and is currently at the back of the line." The entire diner was now silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Julian's friends Caden and Bryce had stopped smirking. They looked nervous, glancing at the door, as if plotting an escape. They had seen Julian's temper before. Julian's eyes narrowed into slits. He saw this not as a simple disagreement, but as a fundamental challenge to his existence. He, Julian Thorne, was being denied something. He laughed a short, ugly bark. "Let's try this another way," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick wad of cash, peeling off several $100 bills and throwing them on the floor between them. "For your trouble. Now get the geezers out of my seat." The money lay on the checkered tiles, a vulgar stain on the diner's simple decency. That was it, the final line. This wasn't about a table anymore. It was about human dignity. Clara looked from the money on the floor to Julian's smug face. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words were cold and hard as steel. "Pick it up," she said. What, he scoffed. "Pick it up," she repeated, enunciating each word. "And then get out of this diner. We don't serve people like you here. Your money means nothing." Julian stared at her, his jaw working silently. The public humiliation was more than he could bear. He was used to people cowering, apologizing, fawning. He was not used to being commanded. With a snarl, he lunged forward, not towards the money, but towards her. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like claws. "You're fired, you little." But the sentence was never finished. Reacting on pure instinct, born of years of protecting herself and her brother, Clara twisted her arm, with a sharp, practiced movement breaking his grip. With her other hand, she gave him a firm, decisive shove on the chest. It wasn't a violent push, but it was so unexpected and so perfectly balanced that the arrogant billionaire, caught off guard, stumbled backward, crashing into a stack of high chairs near the door with a loud clatter. Silence. Absolute pin-drop silence. Julian Thorne lay in a heap of plastic and chrome, his $1,000 suit jacket twisted his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury and shock. Caden and Bryce froze, their faces pale. Clara stood tall, her arm throbbing where he had grabbed it, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pointed a trembling but resolute finger towards the open door. I said she announced, her voice ringing through the cavernous silence. "Get out!" Without a word, a humiliated Julian scrambled to his feet. He shot her a look of such venomous hatred it could have curdled milk, a silent promise of ruin. Then he turned and stormed out, his 2 lackeys scurrying after him like frightened rats. The bell on the door chimed softly as it closed, leaving a stunned diner in its wake. Clara stood there for a long moment, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Then slowly, the enormity of what she had just done began to crash down upon her. She hadn't just kicked out a rude customer. She had kicked out Julian Thorne. She had declared war on an empire. The silence that followed Julian Thorne's chaotic exit was heavier than any noise. It was a vacuum filled with the unspoken fears of everyone present. The regulars stared, a mixture of awe and terror on their faces. The tourists looked like they had gotten a far more real New York experience than they'd bargained for. Chloe was still frozen by the coffee machine, her hands covering her mouth. It was Maria who broke the spell. She walked slowly from behind the counter, her face unreadable. She bent down, not with any sense of civility, but with a weary dignity, and picked up the $100 bills Julian had thrown. She walked over to the tip jar by the register and stuffed them inside. "That's for Chloe's college fund," she announced to the room, her voice firm. Then she turned to Clara, and for a terrifying second, Clara thought she saw disappointment in her eyes. She braced herself for the inevitable words. "You're fired. Do you know what you've done?" Instead, Maria gently took Clara's arm, turning it over to look at the red marks where Julian's fingers had dug in. "Go put some ice on that, honey," she said, softly. "I'll handle the floor." The simple act of kindness was almost Clara's undoing. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving a cold, creeping dread in its place. She retreated to the small, cluttered back office, her legs feeling like lead. She sank onto a wobbly chair, the enormity of her actions washing over her in nauseating waves. She hadn't just stood up for herself and Chloe. She had potentially signed the death warrant for the Gilded Spoon. A man like Julian Thorne didn't just get mad, he got even. He wouldn't key her car or leave a bad Yelp review. He would use the full, crushing weight of his family's fortune to obliterate whatever stood in his way. He would bury the diner in lawsuits. He would find out where she lived. He would discover her enrollment at Cooper Union and use his influence to have her expelled. And Liam. The thought of her brother so fragile and dependent on the stability she fought so hard to provide made her stomach clench with a visceral fear. For the next 2 hours, every time the bell on the diner door chimed, Clara flinched. She expected lawyers in sharp suits serving papers. She expected city inspectors suddenly finding a dozen violations. She expected Julian himself returning with a smug look on his face to watch the diner be shut down. The lunch rush ended. The afternoon lull settled in. Maria came into the office and sat down opposite her, placing a cup of chamomile tea on the desk. "You did the right thing," Clara Maria said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "I might have destroyed your business, Maria." Clara whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "He's a thorn. They don't lose." "There are things more important than a business," Maria replied, her gaze steady. "Respect, dignity. This place was built on that. If we lose it because we stood up for what's right, then so be it. We'll go down with our heads held high." Clara wanted to believe her, wanted to draw strength from her unwavering resolve, but the fear was a cold knot in her stomach. That evening on her subway ride home, she pulled out her phone and, against her better judgment, Googled Julian Thorne. The results were a sickening montage of tabloid photos, Julian on yachts with models. Julian stumbling out of exclusive clubs, Julian at charity galas, with his father, the formidable Alistair Thorne. Alistair. He was the real power, a man who had built a global empire from the ground up. He was often described in business journals as ruthless a visionary and intensely private. In every photo, he had an expression of stoic, unreadable calm. He looked like a man who could move mountains with a single phone call. He was the father of the man she had just publicly humiliated. Clara's tiny apartment felt less like a home that night, and more like a flimsy shelter about to be hit by a hurricane. She tried to study, but the words on the page blurred. The intricate designs of suspension bridges and cantilevered roofs seemed a world away. All she could see was Julian's face contorted with rage. She called her brother a nightly ritual. Liam's voice, though weak, was always a beacon. "How was your day, Clara?" he asked. "It was eventful," she said, trying to keep her voice light. "Just another day in the big city." "Did you ace that physics midterm?" he pressed. Always her biggest cheerleader. Still waiting on the grade, she lied, the guilt twisting inside her. She couldn't tell him. She couldn't add this worry to his already heavy burden. They talked for another 10 minutes about his physical therapy, about a new documentary he'd watched, about anything and everything except the storm that was gathering just over her horizon. The next day, Clara walked to the diner with a sense of impending doom. Every black car that passed seemed to slow down. Every person in a suit looked like a lawyer. She pushed open the door to the Gilded Spoon, her heart in her throat. The diner was quiet. It was the dead time between the breakfast and lunch rushes. Maria was behind the counter polishing glasses. She looked up and gave Clara a small, reassuring smile. Nothing had happened. Yet. The morning passed in a haze of tense anticipation. Clara went through the motions, refilling coffee, taking orders. But her senses were on high alert. At precisely 11:45 a.m., it happened. A car pulled up outside. But it wasn't a flashy sports car like Julian's. It was a long, impossibly black Mercedes-Maybach S680, a vehicle that whispered wealth rather than screamed it. The tinted windows were so dark they looked like polished obsidian. A chauffeur in a grey suit got out, opened the rear door, and stood at attention. Out stepped a man who could only be Alistair Thorne. He was older than in the photos, perhaps, in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair swept back from a high forehead. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that cost more than a year of Clara's tuition. But it wasn't his clothes or his car that commanded attention. It was his presence. He had an aura of stillness, of immense, condensed power. Where Julian was a raging fire, his father was the cold, silent weight of a glacier. He didn't look angry. He didn't look at all. He simply walked to the door of the diner, the chauffeur holding it open for him, and stepped inside. The bell chimed. This time, It sounded like a funeral knell. Maria's hand, which was polishing a glass, froze mid-wipe. Chloe, who was setting tables, dropped a fork with a loud clatter. Clara, standing by the register, felt the blood drain from her face. The hurricane had arrived. Alistair Thorne's gaze swept the room, once taking in every detail of the worn-out diner. His eyes weren't disdainful like his son's. They were analytical, as if he were assessing a potential acquisition. Finally, his eyes, the color of cold steel, landed on Clara. There was no flicker of recognition, yet she knew he knew exactly who she was. He walked towards her, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the tiled floor. He stopped a few feet away. His silence was more intimidating than any threat Julian could ever have uttered. Clara's heart was pounding so hard, she could feel it in her ears. This was it. The end of the line. She braced herself, ready for the explosion. Alistair Thorne looked at her for a long, silent moment. Then he spoke. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone, the sound of old money and absolute authority. He didn't say, "You're fired." He didn't say, "You'll be hearing from my lawyers." He said, "Miss Lawson, I'm Alistair Thorne. You and I need to have a conversation." The air in the gilded spoon grew thick, heavy with the unspoken power Alistair Thorne radiated. Maria began to move protectively towards Clara, but a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of Clara's head stopped her. This was her battle. She had started it, and she would see it through. Mr. Thorne. Clara set her voice surprisingly steady, despite the tremor in her hands. She met his gaze, directly refusing to be the first to look away. In his eyes, she saw none of his son's petulance, only an unnerving, calculating intelligence. "May we sit?" he asked. It was a question, but it had the weight of a command. He gestured towards the very booth his son had tried to claim, which was now fatefully empty. Clara nodded, her mind racing. What was his angle? A public dressing down, a meticulously planned legal threat delivered in person for maximum effect. She led the way to the booth, every nerve ending screaming. Sliding onto the worn vinyl opposite a man whose net worth could probably buy the entire city block, felt surreal. Alistair Thorne sat placing his hands palms down on the Formica tabletop. They were strong, clean hands that had clearly never washed a dish, but had undoubtedly signed deals that shaped skylines. He didn't seem to notice the small crack in the table or the faint stickiness from a long-gone syrup spill. He was entirely focused on her. "Maria," he called out, his voice calm but resonant. "Could we have 2 black coffees, please?" Maria, ever the professional, simply nodded and went to prepare them. The act of ordering coffee, so mundane and normal, was disorienting. It was a power play, Clara realized. He was establishing control, turning this into his meeting in his time. He waited until Maria had delivered the coffees and retreated to a safe distance before he spoke again. "I was given a rather colorful account of an incident that took place here yesterday." He began, his voice even. "My son Julian seems to be under the impression that he was grievously wronged." Clara gripped her mug, the heat a small, grounding comfort. "Your son was harassing my staff and treating other customers with contempt. When I asked him to leave, he refused and became aggressive." She decided against mentioning that he had grabbed her. Let him bring it up. She wouldn't sound like she was making excuses. Alistair took a slow sip of his coffee. He seemed to genuinely consider her words. "My son has a misplaced sense of his own importance, a symptom of a life lived without friction. He believes the Thorne name is a key that opens all doors. He has yet to learn that some doors, the ones worth opening, require a key of character. This was not what Clara expected. She had prepared for threats, for anger, for dismissal. Not philosophy. He threw money on the floor and demanded I kick out an elderly couple for him. Clara stated, keeping her tone factual. That's not a lack of friction, Mr. Thorne. That's a lack of basic human decency. A flicker of something, was it? Disappointment, respect passed through Alistair's steely eyes. Indeed, he said, nodding slowly. Decency. An undervalued asset in today's market. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intensifying. Tell me, Miss Lawson, why did you do it? And don't give me a simple answer. I am not a simple man. The question hung in the air. He wasn't asking about the shove. He was asking about the entire sequence. The refusal, the confrontation, the defiance. He was probing her motives, looking for the bedrock beneath her actions. Clara thought for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She thought of Liam, of the quiet dignity of her regulars, of Maria's unwavering support. Because this place, she said, gesturing to the diner around them, matters. Maybe not to people like you or your son, but it matters. It's a community. People feel safe here. Respected. Your son walked in and tried to shatter that with his money and his name. He tried to make Chloe, a 17-year-old girl, saving for community college, feel worthless. He tried to make the Hendersons feel like their anniversary was an inconvenience. He wasn't just being a jerk, Mr. Thorne. He was trying to prove that his power meant their dignity was worthless. She took a deep breath, the words pouring out now. I didn't do it because I'm brave or reckless. I did it because if you let someone like that chip away at the decency of a place, it rots from the inside out. And I won't let this place rot. Not for any price. Alistair Thorne was silent for a full minute. He stared into his coffee cup as if the secrets of the universe were swirling in the black liquid. Clara's heart hammered. Had she said too much? Had she just insulted him by proxy? Finally, he looked up and his expression had changed. The cold, analytical mask had softened, replaced by a look of profound, weary gravity. For 30 years, he said, his voice dropping to a near-confessional tone, I have tried to teach my son that lesson. I have tried to explain that our name, our wealth, is not a shield for bad behavior, but a responsibility. It is a tool. It can be used to build great things, or it can be used as a club to beat people into submission. He has consistently chosen to see it as a club. He sighed a sound that seemed to come from the very depths of his soul. I have failed. My son is a disappointment. He has a brilliant mind for numbers and acquisitions, but the foundation is cracked. He lacks a moral framework. He paused, then looked directly at Clara. You, Miss Lawson, possess that framework. You have a foundation of solid bedrock. I saw it on the security footage. Clara froze. Security footage? Of course, Alistair said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. My security chief had the footage from this diner's camera within an hour of the incident. I saw the entire thing. The condescension. The money on the floor. I saw him grab your arm. And I saw you defend yourself and your establishment with a composure I have not seen in my own boardroom. He leaned back, a calculated move. The interrogation was over. The proposition was about to begin. I did not come here to apologize for my son, Miss Lawson. An apology from me would be meaningless, and I did not come here to threaten you. That would be beneath me. I came here with an offer. Clara's mind braced for it. A check. A non-disclosure agreement with a hefty payout to make this all go away. I am flying to check on a new construction project upstate this afternoon, he said. A complex cantilevered design for a new corporate retreat. I'm told you are a student of architecture at Cooper Union. Clara's breath caught in her throat. How did he know that? Of course. A man like him could find out her blood type in 5 minutes if he wanted to. The helicopter leaves from the West 30th Street heliport in 1 hour. He continued, ignoring her shock. I want you to come with me. I want to show you the project. I want you to look at the plans. And I want to continue this conversation where we won't be interrupted. Clara was speechless. It was the most bizarre, unexpected twist she could have possibly imagined. A helicopter ride to see an architectural project. Was this a bribe, a threat disguised as a reward? A test? Why, she finally managed to ask her voice, a hoarse whisper. Alistair Thorne stood up, placing a crisp new $100 bill on the table, enough to cover 2 coffees 1,000 times over. Because Miss Lawson, he said, his steel-grey eyes locking onto hers. People with foundations as strong as yours are a rare and valuable commodity. I want to understand what you're built from. The helicopter leaves in 1 hour. A car is waiting for you outside. He turned and walked out of the diner, leaving Clara in the booth, her mind reeling the scent of expensive cologne and the impossible weight of his offer hanging in the air. She had an hour to make a choice that she knew with absolute certainty would change her life forever. The 60 minutes Alistair Thorne had given her felt like both an eternity and a split second. Clara's mind was a maelstrom of conflicting thoughts. One voice, the voice of caution and fear, screamed that this was a trap, a powerful, angry billionaire luring her to a secluded location. It was the plot of a thriller, not a real-life opportunity. He could be planning anything to intimidate her, to threaten her family, in a place where no one could hear her scream to force her into signing a document that would ruin her. But another voice, the voice of her ambition, the one that had pushed her to apply to Cooper Union against all odds, whispered that this was the chance of a lifetime. Alistair Thorne wasn't just a billionaire. He was a master builder. Thorne Global Properties was at the apex of architectural innovation. To see a project of that magnitude, to speak with the man who commissioned it, it was an opportunity that most architecture students could only dream of. It was a glimpse into the world she was fighting so desperately to enter. Her eyes fell on Maria, who was watching her with a worried expression. "What do you think?" Clara asked, her voice barely audible. Maria wiped her hands on her apron. "I think men like that don't make offers without a reason. He's not interested in your opinion on architecture, honey. He's interested in you. The question is why. Be careful. A lion may praise a sheep, but it's still a lion." Maria's words were wise, but they also held a challenge. Clara had never been a sheep. She looked at her reflection in the dark coffee. She saw a tired waitress in a cheap uniform, but inside she was the architect of her own life. She had to be. For Liam. With a deep breath, she stood up. "I have to go." She ran to the back, shrugging off her apron and grabbing her worn backpack, the one that held her sketchbook and pencils. It felt like a shield. She was no longer just a waitress. She was an architecture student. She was going to meet him on her terms. The black Maybach was still idling at the curb, a silent, imposing beast. The chauffeur, a man with the impassive face of a bodyguard, opened the door for her, without a word. The interior was like a private jet, plush leather-polished wood, and a silence so profound it felt like being in a different dimension from the noisy street outside. The ride to the heliport was a blur of traffic and anxiety. Clara's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. When they arrived, Alistair Thorne was waiting, standing beside a sleek black Augusta-Westland AW-139 helicopter, its rotors beginning to spin with a low, powerful thrum. He had changed from his suit into a more casual but equally expensive cashmere sweater and slacks. He looked less like a corporate titan and more like a king surveying his domain. "Punctual, another valuable asset," he commented as she approached, handing her a pair of noise-cancelling headphones. The flight was an experience in sensory overload. As the helicopter lifted off, the familiar grid of Manhattan sprawled below her like a living blueprint. It was the city she loved, the city she dreamed of shaping, seen from a perspective of incredible power and privilege. She could see the iconic skyscrapers, some of which bore the Thorne name, piercing the clouds. It was intoxicating and terrifying. Alistair pointed out landmarks not as a tour guide, but as a general reviewing his territory. Through the headphones, his voice was a calm, clear presence in the roaring chaos of the rotors. "Look there," he said, pointing to a new, impossibly thin residential tower near Central Park. "Engineered support structures. We had to sink caissons 200 feet into the Manhattan schist. A foundation problem. Everything Miss Lawson always comes back to the foundation." Clara found her voice. "The lateral load must be immense. You'd need a significant tuned mass damper to handle the wind shear at that height." Alistair turned to look at her, a genuine spark of surprise in his eyes. He had expected a passenger. He had gotten a peer, however junior. "We do. A 600-ton pendulum. You've done your reading." "I'm not just a waitress, Mr. Thorne," she replied, her confidence growing. In this realm, the realm of design and structure, she wasn't out of her depth. They flew for another 20 minutes, leaving the city behind for the lush green expanse of the Hudson Valley. They finally descended towards a clearing in a dense forest where a stunning structure was taking shape. It was a building of glass, steel, and dark wood that seemed to jut out from a granite cliff face suspended over the trees below. It was daring, beautiful, and a breathtaking feat of engineering. They landed, and as they walked towards the construction site, Alistair began to talk. He spoke of stress points and materials, of the challenges of building on a sheer rock face, of the interplay between light and shadow. Clara listened enthralled, interjecting with questions about the structural integrity and the environmental impact, her sketchbook already in hand, her pencil flying across the page. They stood on a temporary platform overlooking the valley, the view majestic. The air was crisp and clean. It was a world away from the greasy air of the Gilded Spoon. "What do you think?" Alistair asked. "It's audacious," Clara said honestly. "It defies gravity. It's a statement." "And what is the statement?" he pressed. "That with a strong enough anchor," she said, looking at the massive steel bolts drilled deep into the cliffside, you can build anything. You can reach out into the void without fear." Alistair smiled, a rare, genuine smile that briefly transformed his severe features. "Precisely. And that Miss Lawson brings me to the real reason we are here." He turned to face her, the wind whipping at his silver hair. The pleasantries were over. The test had arrived. "I have an offer for you, and it has nothing to do with a helicopter ride." I am prepared to pay for the remainder of your tuition at Cooper Union. All of it. Furthermore, I am offering you a paid senior-level internship at Thorn Global Properties, working directly with our lead design team. You will have access to projects and minds that will put you a decade ahead of your peers. I will also take care of your brother's medical expenses. All of them. In their entirety. Clara's world tilted on its axis. Every single one of her burdens. Tuition. Liam's health, her future, was being lifted in a single sentence. It was a rescue, a golden ticket, a dream so fantastical she couldn't have dared to imagine it. Her mind instantly went to Liam, to the relief, the freedom from worry this would give him. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she remembered Maria's words. A lion may praise a sheep. What's the catch? She asked, her voice shaking slightly. What do you want from me in return? Alistair's smile vanished, replaced by that same look of intense, serious gravity from the diner. I want you to work on a project for me. A rehabilitation project. He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. The project is my son. You will be placed on Julian's team. He is overseeing a new development in Hudson Yards. You will be his subordinate, officially. You will report to him. But your real report will be to me. I don't want you to be his friend. I don't want you to be his teacher. I want you to be exactly what you were in that diner, an unmovable object. A standard of integrity he cannot bully, he cannot buy, and he cannot break. He took a step closer. I have given my son every advantage, every tool except for one, a worthy adversary. A consequence. I believe that forcing him to work alongside someone who has already stood up to him, someone who owes her position not to him, but to me, someone who embodies the character he so desperately lacks. It might be the only chance he has left to build a foundation of his own. Clara stared at him horrified. It wasn't a golden ticket. It was a sentence. He wanted to use her. He wanted to put her in a cage with the very man who had assaulted and humiliated her, and he wanted to watch what would happen. He was offering to save her life, but the price was to step back into the lion's den every single day. You're asking me to be bait, she said, the words tasting like ash. I'm asking you to be a benchmark, he corrected, his voice cold as the steel bolts in the rock beside them. I'm offering you the world, Miss Lawson. Your future, your brother's health. In return, I need your strength. The choice is yours. The wind on the cliffside was a wild, clean thing, whipping at Clara's worn jacket and clearing her head. Before her stood a man who held the keys to a kingdom she had only ever seen from the outside, and he was dangling them right in front of her. The structure they had just toured, a breathtaking marriage of audacity and engineering, seemed to pale in comparison to the structure of the offer he was now building in the air between them. I am offering you a path, Miss Lawson. Alistair Thorne, said, his voice a low counterpoint to the rushing wind, one that bypasses the years of struggle, of debt, of fighting for recognition. I am prepared to fund the entirety of your remaining tuition at Cooper Union. Not a loan, a grant. Furthermore, I am offering you a paid senior-level internship at Thorn Global Properties. You would not be fetching coffee. You would be working alongside our lead design team on the Hudson Yards redevelopment. You will have access to resources, minds, and projects that will place you a decade ahead of your peers. Clara's world, which for years had been a precarious balancing act on a knife's edge, suddenly felt solid under her feet. The words washed over her, each one a balm on a deep, persistent wound. Tuition paid. The crushing weight of debt, the constant fear of not being able to finish her degree, vanished. Paid internship. An end to the grueling double life of waitress and student, an end to choosing between a new textbook and a decent meal. She saw for a dizzying second a future unburdened by financial terror. Then he delivered the final heart-stopping blow. I will also assume complete financial responsibility for your brother's medical care. All of it. The treatments, the consultations, the hospital stays. Whatever he needs from whomever he needs it, wherever in the world that may be. That was the moment her defenses crumbled. The image of Liam, not gaunt and tired in his small bedroom, but healthy and vibrant, flooded her mind. The constant sickening knot of dread in her stomach, the one that tightened every time the phone rang with a call from a doctor or an insurance agent, simply dissolved. Tears, hot and immediate, sprang to her eyes. It was a rescue. A miracle delivered by this cold, calculating man. It was too good to be true. She looked at him, her heart overflowing with a desperate, burgeoning hope. This man, for whatever reason, was her savior. She remembered Maria's warning, a faint echo from another lifetime. A lion may praise a sheep, but it's still a lion. Her nascent gratitude was tempered by a sliver of caution. Why she finally managed to ask, her voice thick with emotion. No one does something like this for nothing. What is the catch, Mr. Thorne? What could you possibly want from me in return? Alistair's expression remained unreadable, but a subtle shift occurred in his posture. The benevolent benefactor retreated, and the ruthless strategist returned. The warmth of the offer receded, replaced by the chill of a transaction. I do in fact require your services for a project, he said. A rehabilitation project of sorts. A structure that has been built with the finest materials, but suffers from a profoundly flawed foundation. He paused, letting the architectural metaphor settle before delivering its true meaning. The project is my son. The air rushed out of Clara's lungs. The beautiful future he had just painted cracked and shattered like fragile glass. What are you talking about? She whispered, though she already knew. You will be placed on Julian's team for the Hudson Yards project. Officially, you will be his subordinate, a junior member of his staff. You will attend his meetings. You will take his direction. Alistair explained, his tone clinical. But your true purpose will be different. Your real report will be to me. I don't want you to befriend him. I don't want you to counsel him. I want you to be precisely what you were in that diner, an unshakable standard. A presence of integrity. He cannot bully, he cannot buy, and he cannot break. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. I have spent a fortune and a lifetime trying to instill character in him. I have failed. I believe that forcing him into close professional proximity with someone who has already bested him, someone whose position is owed entirely to me, and is therefore untouchable by him, someone who embodies the principles he scoffs at, it may be the only chance he has left to develop a moral core. Clara stared at him, a cold, sickening horror creeping up her spine. This wasn't an act of generosity. It was an experiment, a cruel, manipulative game where she was the primary instrument. The helicopter, the architectural tour, the life-altering offer, it was all an elaborate prelude to this. He wanted to use her trauma, her strength, as a tool to fix his broken son. You're asking me to be bait, she said, the words tasting like ash. The image of Julian's face contorted with rage as he grabbed her arm flashed in her mind. He wanted her to willingly walk back into that. "I'm asking you to be a benchmark," he corrected, his voice sharp. The horror curdled into fury. "No." She said the word, a small explosion. "Absolutely not. Do you have any idea what you're asking? That man assaulted me. He humiliated my friend. He is a walking embodiment of disrespect and entitlement. You want me to sit in an office with him every day, to subject myself to his arrogance and his temper, to wait for the moment he decides to lash out again. You aren't trying to build his character. You're using me as his punching bag." She expected him to be angry to rescind the offer. Instead, he simply watched her, his expression one of detached analysis. "Your reaction is precisely why you are the ideal candidate," he said calmly. "You see him for exactly what he is. You are not intimidated. I am not a lab rat." "Mr. Thorne," Clara shot back, her voice rising, "and my life, my brother's life, is not a pawn in your twisted family drama. The answer is no." She turned, ready to walk away, to find her own way back to the city, to her old life of struggle, which suddenly seemed infinitely preferable to this gilded cage. "Systemic lupus erythematosus," Alistair said, his voice stopping her dead in her tracks. "Your brother's specific diagnosis, it's particularly aggressive. The current regimen of corticosteroids is managing the symptoms, but causing long-term damage to his bones and organs. Your insurance provider, Aetna, has twice denied the claim for the experimental immunosuppressant therapy at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. The therapy via Lumab has shown a 70% success rate in clinical trials for patients with his specific genetic markers. The out-of-pocket cost for the first year of treatment is approximately $580,000. Clara slowly turned back to face him, the fury drained out of her, replaced by an icy dread. He hadn't just done a background check. He had done a complete dissection of her life's most vulnerable point. He knew the name of the drug. He knew the clinic. He had laid her soul bare on a spreadsheet. It was the single most violating act she had ever experienced. "I had my office make inquiries this morning." He continued, his tone relentlessly impassive. "Without that treatment, his prognosis is managed decline. With it, he has a significant chance at a full and lasting remission. A normal life." He paused, delivering the final crushing blow. "The choice of whether he receives that treatment is now yours." It wasn't an offer. It was a hostage negotiation, and her brother was the hostage. The fight went out of her, leaving a hollow space filled with despair. He had her. He had cornered her so completely that every path of refusal led to a cliff's edge of guilt she could never survive. To deny Liam this chance for the sake of her own pride was unthinkable. She had always been his protector. She would not fail him now. She stood there for a long moment, the wind whipping around her, the silence stretching. In that silence, something inside her shifted. The despair began to burn away, forged by the heat of her anger, into something hard and resilient. Steel. If she was being forced into this game, she would not play it as a pawn. She would rewrite the rules. She lifted her chin, her eyes now dry and fierce, meeting his. "If I agree to this," she said, her voice low and controlled, "it will be on my terms, not yours." Alistair raised a single silver eyebrow, a flicker of genuine curiosity in his eyes. "I'm listening." First, she began ticking the point off on her finger, as if she were outlining a blueprint. "I am an architect in training, not a spy. My reports to you will be delivered weekly via email and will pertain only to project milestones, professional conduct, and the integrity of the work. I will not report on his personal life. I will not be your source for gossip or emotional drama. You will get the facts, nothing more." An efficient and professional arrangement, Alistair conceded with a nod. "Agreed." Second, my professional autonomy must be guaranteed. While I may sit below Julian on an organizational chart, I will have a direct and unimpeded line of communication to you and to the chief architect, Ms. Eleanor Vance. If your son attempts to sabotage my work, bury my designs, or professionally marginalize me, I will not be silenced by a chain of command that he controls. A wise and necessary stipulation. "Granted." Third, she said, taking a breath and steadying herself for the most crucial point. "And on this, there is no negotiation. The arrangement is terminated immediately if Julian Thorne resorts to any form of physical intimidation or targeted abusive harassment. The moment he crosses that line, the one he already crossed in the diner, I walk. And your commitment to my brother's lifelong medical care remains. It becomes an irrevocable trust. That part of our deal must be unconditional ironclad and drafted by a top-tier contract lawyer of my choosing whose fees you will cover." She had laid it all out. She had taken his cold, manipulative offer and forged it into a shield. She had demanded respect, autonomy, and a safety clause that put the onus of failure squarely on his son while protecting the one thing that truly mattered. Alistair Thorne was silent for a long moment, studying her. The analytical mask was gone, replaced by a look of profound, undisguised astonishment that slowly bloomed into a broad smile. Then he laughed. It was not a polite chuckle. It was a deep, booming laugh that seemed to echo across the valley. "Magnificent," he declared, his eyes shining with genuine admiration. "Absolutely magnificent. I bring you to a cliff's edge, leverage your family's health, and present you with an impossible choice. And you don't just surrender, you counter-negotiate with the precision of a seasoned attorney. You build your own fortifications." He shook his head in wonder. "You, Miss Lawson, are the real deal." He extended his hand. "You have a deal, on every single one of your terms. Draw up the list of lawyers. My office will be in touch." Clara looked at his hand. Shaking it no longer felt like a surrender. It felt like an armistice, a treaty signed between two formidable powers. She placed her hand in his, and his grip was firm and final. A contract with the devil had been signed, but she had managed to write her own clauses in the fine print. The flight back was different. The city that sprawled below was no longer just a dream. It was a battlefield she was about to enter, armed with a billionaire's backing and her own unshakable will. Her last shift at the Gilded Spoon was a haze of poignant goodbyes. When she explained to Maria that she'd been offered an unbelievable internship, the older woman hugged her, her embrace smelling of cinnamon and strength. "I knew he saw fire in you, Clara," Maria whispered fiercely. "Just don't let that world of cold glass and sharp edges put it out. Remember the warmth of this place. Remember what you're made of." The next Monday, Clara rode a silent, brushed steel elevator, 60 floors into the sky. She stepped out into the cathedral-like quiet of Thorne Global Properties. It was a universe of polished concrete, seamless glass walls and hushed, focused energy. The only sound was the distant hum of the city below. After a brief orientation, she was led to a sleek white desk in a vast, open-plan space. Her eyes scanned the area, and then she saw him. Julian Thorne stood across the expansive room, leaning over a holographic model surrounded by his team. He looked confident, powerful, and utterly at home. He was a prince in his castle. Then his gaze swept across the office and snagged on her. The confident smile on his face froze, then melted away. His posture straightened his body, going rigid with disbelief. Clara watched as a kaleidoscope of emotions flickered across his face, utter shock, then confusion, which quickly curdled into a dark, familiar rage. He wasn't just looking at a new intern. He was looking at the living ghost of his most public and profound humiliation, inexplicably resurrected in the heart of his own empire. Clara held his gaze. She didn't smile. She didn't scowl. Her expression was one of placid, professional neutrality. Inside, her heart hammered against her ribs, but her exterior was a mask of calm resolve. She gave him a single deliberate nod, a minute almost imperceptible gesture of acknowledgement, a colleague to a colleague. The message, however, was as clear as the glass walls surrounding them. I'm here. I'm not a waitress anymore. You don't control this, and I am not afraid of you. Julian's jaw tightened, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of the table. To everyone else, it was just a new employee starting her first day. But to the two of them, it was the opening bell of a war no one else knew had been declared. The game had changed, and Clara Lawson had just walked onto the board. Clara's story isn't just about a single act of defiance in a diner. It's about what happens next. It's a gripping reminder that true strength isn't about the power you're born with, but the character you build when you're tested. She stepped out of her world and into the lion's den, not as prey, but as a force of nature in her own right. This is where the real drama begins, a daily battle of wits and wills inside a corporate empire, with a brother's life and her own future hanging in the balance. Can integrity survive in a world of cutthroat ambition? Can a broken heir be rebuilt? Or will he try to destroy the one person who sees his cracks? If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of standing your ground, then please help us share it. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a story of courage, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The next chapter of Clara's journey is one you won't want to miss.
After being betrayed, poor wife, left with her son. Years later, the millionaire regretted it forever. They say time heals all wounds, but some scars never fade, especially the ones left by betrayal. Years ago, Clara Hathaway was a woman in love, swept into a world of wealth and privilege she never imagined. But in that world, she was never truly welcome. Humiliated, abandoned, and left to fend for herself while carrying a child, she walked away, determined to build a life on her own. Now, years later, the man who once cast her aside, the millionaire who had everything but valued nothing, is about to learn a painful lesson. Because fate has a way of turning tables, and when he finally comes face to face with the woman he wronged and the son he never knew, he realizes the greatest regret of his life wasn't losing his fortune. It was losing them. But is redemption possible? Or are some betrayals too deep to forgive? Stay with me as we uncover a story of love, loss, and a reckoning that will leave you speechless. Clara Hathaway was born in a small town outside Philadelphia, a place where summer nights buzzed with the chatter of cicadas and winter mornings glittered beneath fresh snow. Her mother, Margaret, worked long hours at a local diner. Her father, Charles, was a carpenter who never quite made ends meet. Despite their modest means, Clara was raised with immeasurable warmth and attention. She learned early on that one's value lay not in wealth, but in kindness and resilience. At 16, Clara discovered her talent for painting. She could transform a plain canvas into a riot of color and emotion, capturing sunsets, laughter, and heartbreak. To her father, she confided her deepest secret dream. Someday she wanted to see her artwork displayed in New York's famed galleries. He encouraged her to pursue it, always telling her, "You've got the heart of an artist, Clara. That's more valuable than any fortune." Fast forward to her college years at the University of Pennsylvania, where she studied fine arts. Despite scholarship assistance, she had to work part-time at a catering company to meet her living expenses. It was at one of these events, a lavish charity gala in downtown Philadelphia, where fate intervened. She was on the serving staff that evening, wearing a plain black uniform with a crisp white apron. Meanwhile, Alexander Sterling, who everyone called Alex, was in attendance with his equally affluent friends. He was a young entrepreneur from a rich Boston family, heir to the Sterling Industries empire. With sleek dark hair and a confident smile, he carried an aura of effortless aristocracy. At that time he was 28, fresh from a triumphant business venture that netted him millions overnight. Alex was bored by the typical crowds at these high society events. Then his gaze landed on Clara, who was quietly serving champagne. Something about her delicate poise, the way she seemed comfortable in her own skin, even while hustling with a tray of glasses, captured his attention. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was doing her job, eyes shimmering with an unspoken dream. That night, he didn't immediately speak to her, but he remembered her face. An unexpected pang of curiosity gnawed at him. Days later, as if orchestrated by destiny, they crossed paths in the university courtyard. Clara, carrying art supplies, collided with him by accident. Charcoal sketches went flying into the wind. Alex knelt to help her gather them, and that fleeting moment crystallized something. A warmth in Clara's eyes contrasted sharply with the circle of opulence he was accustomed to. A conversation sparked, kindled by genuine interest. Their connection felt natural, like two pieces of a puzzle. Not long after, Alex asked her out for coffee. Clara, initially hesitant, finally agreed. Thus began a whirlwind romance that no one could have predicted, the up-and-coming millionaire and the down-to-earth artist. Their early relationship was woven with stolen kisses between classes, late-night walks by the Squealkill River, and confessions about their dreams for the future. She taught him how to see beauty in small things, while he introduced her to a world of infinite possibility and, admittedly, infinite temptations. In the eyes of the world, they were an odd pair, but in each other's eyes they found a perfect fit. Neither could foresee the heartbreak and public humiliations that would come, not in those early days when love seemed invincible beneath the star-swept sky. A year into their relationship, Clara began to see small fissures in Alex's otherwise flawless facade. While he showered her with gifts, a silver bracelet for her birthday, tickets to exclusive art shows, romantic weekend getaways, there was a guarded intensity lurking beneath his charm. He was fiercely ambitious, constantly surrounded by wealthy friends and business associates who had grown up in the same privileged circles. Clara found herself struggling to keep her footing in that environment. She was a self-made spirit, used to living frugally and working 2 part-time jobs. The ostentatious parties, the designer clothes, and the expensive champagne often felt alien. She tried her best to adapt because she loved Alex, and at times she couldn't help but feel like she was living in a dream, her new life a stark contrast to the diner in her hometown. However, she noticed that whenever Alex introduced her to his associates, an undercurrent of skepticism floated in the air. His friend group included names like Gregory "Greg" Ridley, the heir to a real estate empire, and Sabrina Marchant, a glamorous investor known for her strategic mind and predatory flair in business deals. They would smile politely at Clara, but she sensed their silent judgment. "She's not one of us." It didn't help that Clara was fiercely independent and unwilling to let Alex pay her bills. When he insisted on buying her a brand new BMW for her 21st birthday, she politely declined. "I can't let you do that," she said softly, hoping to appease his pride. "I can't even afford the insurance." The tension spilled over during an after-party at Alex's penthouse suite in New York. Clara witnessed Alex stress out over the slightest thing, like if a waiter brought the wrong brand of sparkling water. She also overheard him on a heated phone call with an investor, using cutting words that alarmed her. She approached him afterward, concern etched on her face. "Are you okay?" He brushed her off with a forced smile. "Just business. You wouldn't understand." That one line stung. You wouldn't understand. It implied an intellectual or experiential gulf that set them apart. She swallowed her hurt, attributing his brusqueness to business pressure. But the cracks had begun, hairline fractures in a seemingly robust relationship. In a quieter moment, Alex confessed his frustration about his father's looming presence. "I have to prove myself, Clara," he said. "My father thinks I'm just coasting on the sterling name." This vulnerability opened a window into his insecurities. Suddenly Clara understood. Alex's arrogance was partly armor to hide a fear of not being good enough. She tried to reassure him, saying, "You're talented, Alex. You have everything you need to succeed on your own." But sometimes no amount of reassurance can fill the void of self-doubt. Life went on, with fleeting moments of joy overshadowing the creeping sense of disconnection. Clara painted, Alex hustled for bigger deals. They still found comfort in each other's arms at night, but beneath the surface, the first cracks in their gilded life were forming. Neither realized how deep those fissures would soon become. By the time Clara graduated, their relationship had evolved into an engagement. Alex proposed in the courtyard where they first met, presenting a stunning ring that glistened in the afternoon sun. Tears of happiness spilled down Clara's cheeks as she said yes. She thought it was the happiest day of her life, a promise that their love would weather any storms. They scheduled a wedding for the following spring at a luxurious vineyard estate owned by Alex's acquaintance, Sabrina Marchant. It was to be a grand ceremony with hundreds of guests, business moguls, celebrities, and politicians. Word traveled in social circles. The young sterling scion was marrying an art school graduate of humble background. In the months leading up to the wedding, Clara frequently felt like a fish out of water. Under the guise of offering help, Sabrina took it upon herself to criticize nearly every choice Clara made for the wedding. "Darling, that color is too pastel," she would say, or "those centerpieces look cheap." Greg Ridley chimed in with remarks like, "I hope you're prepared for the tabloids," or "Are you sure you can handle the sterling lifestyle?" One evening, the humiliations reached a fever pitch. Clara and Alex attended a charity banquet in Boston, hosted by a prominent figure named Howard Winchester. The event was as glamorous as it was exclusive, featuring a performance by renowned cellist Yo-Yo Ma and a buffet catered by chef Thomas Keller. Dressed in a pale blue gown, Clara clung to Alex's arm, trying to hide her nervousness. During dinner, an influential gallery owner named Meredith Walton approached their table. Clara had spent months yearning to meet someone like Meredith, hoping to secure a chance to showcase her art. Sensing an opportunity, Clara politely introduced herself, heart pounding. But before she could finish her sentence, Sabrina slid into the conversation, overshadowing Clara with boastful chatter. "Oh, Clara's art is nice," Sabrina said, her tone dripping with condescension. "She's got a lovely hobby, but her real focus, of course, is preparing for her new life as Mrs. Sterling." Laughter rippled around the table, though some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Clara's cheeks burned. She looked to Alex, hoping he would speak up, yet he remained silent, offering her a tight smile that seemed to say, "Let it go." Later, when Clara asked him why he hadn't defended her passion, he shrugged. They didn't mean any harm. You can't be so sensitive. Hurt swirled in her chest. She felt minimized, cast aside as a mere accessory. The seeds of humiliation had taken root, each subtle jab or dismissive remark blossoming into bruises on her self-esteem. She tried to brush them off, told herself love and patience would prevail. But a small, insistent voice in her mind asked, "What if this is my life from now on?" She pushed that question aside, burying it beneath wedding plans and the dream of a happy future. Yet deep down, Clara began to realize that the wealth and influence surrounding Alex were not just gilded frames. They could also be chains, locking her into a world she never asked to enter. When the wedding day finally arrived, it was a sight to behold. The vineyard estate boasted rows upon rows of lush grapevines, an elegant pergola adorned with white roses, and a gentle spring breeze that carried a hint of lavender. Clara wore a gown embroidered with delicate lace, her hair styled in a soft chignon. Alex, in a tailored black tuxedo, looked every bit the dashing groom. From the outside, everything was perfect. Their vows, exchanged under a bright sky, brought tears to many eyes. Clara felt a wave of love and hope, as if the humiliations and judgments of the past months had dissolved under the promise of a new beginning. Alex squeezed her hands and whispered, "I love you." In that moment, she believed him wholeheartedly, but the reception that followed signaled the turning point. The exuberant celebrations included a cocktail hour, a 3-course dinner, and a band playing jazz standards. Among the well-wishers were many from the highest rungs of society, yet overshadowing the joy was a sense of competition and scrutiny. Every table buzzed with rumors about business deals, about who wore what designer label, about who was next in line for a board position. Clara felt more like a hostess to the wealthy crowd than a bride meant to be celebrated. Late into the evening, Alex's father, Lawrence Sterling, made a speech. He was a towering figure in a midnight blue suit, his hair silvered with age. Clearing his throat, he raised a glass. "A toast to my son and his lovely bride," he began, maintaining the veneer of paternal warmth. He extolled Alex's business achievements, commending the young man's instincts and cunning. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "And of course, we welcome Clara into our family. May she be an excellent companion to Alexander and, someday, a wonderful mother to his children." The wording was subtle, but Clara felt a slap of reality. She wondered, is that all I'm meant to be? A companion and a mother? Not a passionate artist with dreams of my own? From that night onward, Alex changed in small but significant ways. He grew more distant, immersing himself in expanding his empire. Their honeymoon was postponed due to pressing business matters. When Clara asked if they could still go for a shorter trip, he refused, saying, "We can't take half measures. I'll make it up to you." At first, Clara tried to be understanding. She painted in her new studio, a wedding gift from Alex, grateful for the chance to create. But the sense of disconnection nagged at her. Their intimate moments were overshadowed by his phone calls, dinners were rushed affairs, and he often returned home so late that she was already asleep. Then came the day she discovered she was pregnant. Clara felt joy surge within her. A new life was growing in her womb. She imagined a child who might inherit her artistic flair or Alex's quick mind. She hoped this news would draw them closer, heal the distant cracks that threatened to break them apart. But as she would soon find out, a new chapter of vulnerability and heartbreak was about to unfold, one that would test her strength in unimaginable ways. Pregnancy brought changes Clara hadn't anticipated. She experienced morning sickness, fatigue, and a roller coaster of emotions. Yet her excitement remained steadfast. She planned how the nursery would look: soft pastel walls, a handmade mobile, and whimsical watercolor paintings. She tried to share these hopes with Alex, but he was more concerned about scaling up his next acquisition. "We'll hire the best decorators," he said absently. "Don't stress yourself." Often Clara found herself alone in the Sterling mansion, the echo of her footsteps magnified by the emptiness. She confided her fears in Margaret, her mother, who offered gentle words over long phone calls. "You have to stand up for yourself, honey. He's your husband, but that doesn't mean you should lose your voice." When she was 6 months pregnant, Alex organized a business event at their home to showcase new developments under Sterling Industries. Among the attendees were Sabrina Marchant, Greg Ridley, and numerous corporate elites. Despite Clara's condition, Alex insisted she host the event to show the family side of Sterling's brand. That night, as servers circulated with champagne flutes and caviar, Clara tried her best to be the gracious hostess, but a guest, slightly tipsy, made a dismissive comment about Alex's charity case of a wife. Clara overheard it, her cheeks burning with humiliation. She glanced at Alex, hoping for some defense, some recognition that such a remark was unacceptable. Instead, Alex delivered the final blow. While speaking about the future of his company, he made an offhand joke, referencing the logistical challenge of an unexpected pregnancy, implying that fatherhood had caught him off guard at a critical time in his business. The crowd chuckled politely. Clara felt every muscle in her body tense. Tears blurred her vision. She retreated to a corner, physically ill. Instead of comforting her, Alex appeared irritated. "You're making a scene," he hissed, pulling her aside. "Can't you at least wait until the guests leave?" That was the moment something inside her snapped. She realized with crystal clarity that she, and now their unborn child, were nothing more than accessories in his carefully curated life. She packed a bag that very night, tears streaming down her face. The next morning, she told him she was leaving. His response was cold and laced with anger. "If you walk away now, don't expect to come crawling back," he said. Clara steeled herself. In a quiet voice, she replied, "I won't." Divorce proceedings began swiftly. Alex's high-powered lawyers tried to keep the affair discreet, but rumors circulated. After all, he was a prominent figure. Some tabloids gossiped that she was a gold digger, others portrayed Alex as a ruthless playboy. Only a few recognized the reality. Two people once in love, torn apart by pride and humiliation. By the time the papers were signed, Clara had moved out to a modest apartment in Philadelphia, determined to rebuild her life. She ignored the hush money the lawyers offered. All she asked was to raise her unborn child in peace. She had no illusions about the difficulty ahead, but she also felt a surge of liberation. For the first time in months, the humiliations had lost their power over her. She was ready to stand on her own, for herself and her child. Late autumn leaves swirled around Clara as she stepped out of the courthouse. The final divorce decree rested in her trembling hands, marking both an end and a beginning. She was 7 months pregnant, yet somehow lighter. Freed from the stifling environment of Alex's world, she could finally breathe again. She moved into a small, rented apartment in a neighborhood near Center City. It wasn't luxurious. The paint was peeling in a few spots, and the pipes clanged when water heated. But it was hers. She set up her easel by the largest window, where natural light poured in. Every morning she would make a cup of herbal tea, rest her hand on her growing belly and whisper, "We'll be okay." The struggle to regain her footing was real. She had to find a new job despite her pregnancy. Thankfully, a friend from art school, Jennifer Delgado, recommended her for a part-time teaching position at a community center. The pay was modest, but it allowed Clara to share her love of painting with children from disadvantaged backgrounds. She found solace in their joyful energy, in their bright eyes brimming with curiosity. At night, Clara painted. She poured her heartache and hope onto the canvas, exploring themes of metamorphosis, flowers breaking through concrete, birds taking flight. To her surprise, some of her pieces caught the attention of a small local gallery owned by an older woman named Rose Williams. Rose admired Clara's raw emotion, and soon Clara had her first local exhibit. Though it was a modest affair, it felt monumental to her. With each stroke of her brush, she rebuilt the fragments of her identity. Meanwhile, Alex was nowhere in sight. The only time she heard his name was through the occasional news snippet or social media post, touting Sterling Industries' latest triumph. While the tabloids briefly covered their divorce, interest waned when Clara refused interviews and Alex remained silent. Then came the day her water broke 2 weeks before her due date. Jennifer rushed her to the hospital. The delivery was neither simple nor painless, but after hours of labor, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy, whom she named Lucas. In her arms, Lucas's tiny fingers curled around hers, and Clara felt an overwhelming surge of love. Tears of joy mingled with sorrow that Alex wasn't there, but she pushed that thought away. This was her moment, her new beginning. Motherhood was a whirlwind of midnight feedings, diaper changes, and constant worry. But the first time Lucas smiled at her, all the exhaustion melted into pure adoration. She vowed to provide him with a life rich in love and creativity, even if financial struggles persisted. Days turned into weeks, and soon Lucas was cooing and kicking in his baby gym. Clara found a new routine. Teach painting classes at the community center in the morning, care for Lucas in the afternoon, paint at night when he slept. Each day brought small victories, Lucas rolling over for the first time, Clara selling a painting for a few $100s, and the glimmer of confidence returning to her eyes. Yes, life was harder now without the safety net of wealth. Yet in many ways, Clara felt more whole than she had in a long time. The humiliation from Alex's world still haunted her sometimes in her dreams, but each sunrise reminded her that she was free to pursue her own path, and that meant more than any fortune could buy. Lucas was the sun around which Clara's world now revolved. He had a head of dark hair, a cooing laugh, and eyes that sparkled with mischief. Even at just a few months old, he seemed alert to the colors and shapes around him, often babbling in delight when Clara painted. One chilly winter evening, as Clara gently rocked Lucas to sleep, she received a call from Margaret. Her mother was coming to visit. When Margaret arrived, she scooped Lucas up into her arms and showered him with grandmotherly affection. Margaret's eyes filled with pride at how her daughter had managed on her own. "You've done so well, sweetheart," she whispered, pressing a kiss to Clara's forehead. Still, the topic of Alex lingered like a ghost in the background. Margaret inquired politely, "Has he reached out?" Clara shook her head. Not once. Not even to check on Lucas. Her tone held sadness, but also resignation. She had made her choice, and she didn't regret it, at least not for her own sake. For Lucas, it was more complicated. She had once hoped that Lucas would know his father, but Alex's silence spoke volumes. In truth, Alex wasn't completely ignorant of Lucas's birth. He had been notified by his lawyers, who advised him on custody and support. Initially, Alex seemed content to settle everything through his legal team. Clara refused any large sums or monthly stipends. She worried that it might entangle her again in Alex's life on his terms. However, she didn't block him from acknowledging his child. She left that door open, hoping against hope that the father in him would care enough to walk through it. Time passed, and Lucas began to crawl. Clara took countless photographs of him, capturing every tiny milestone. She hung them on the walls, filling the apartment with memories instead of regrets. Occasionally, she posted a photo on social media, but only for a small circle of friends. She never tagged Alex, never sought his attention. Yet part of her still wondered, does he think about us? Behind the scenes, Alex was indeed thinking, though not in the ways Clara might have expected. He was consumed with regret, battling an internal war between pride and longing. He read every update his lawyer sent him about Lucas's progress. A part of him wanted to pick up the phone to see his son for the first time. But another part, hardened by arrogance, believed that if Clara had really cared, she would have told him directly and invited him in. He rationalized his inaction with the thought that she chose to leave, so it was on her to bridge the gap. and so father and son remained separated by ego and past hurts. Clara, meanwhile, focused on survival and small joys. She found time to paint whimsical scenes of mother and child, eventually selling them in the local gallery. She poured every ounce of love into Lucas, determined to give him the childhood she wished she'd had, one filled with security, affection, and an appreciation for life's simple wonders. No matter how tired she felt, or how her bank account dwindled some months, Clara never wished to return to the Sterling mansion. She had escaped a life that suffocated her soul. In her cozy apartment, rocking Lucas to sleep, she realized she had discovered something priceless, a sense of self-worth that no amount of wealth could ever replace. When Lucas turned 1, Clara threw a small birthday party in her apartment, inviting a handful of close friends from the community center and her mother. The atmosphere was filled with laughter, balloons, and the scent of a homemade vanilla cake. Lucas squealed in delight as he smeared frosting across his cheeks, his bright eyes dancing under the soft glow of fairy lights strung up around the living room. The party also marked a turning point for Clara's career. Rose Williams, the gallery owner who had taken an interest in her art, approached her with an exciting proposition, a solo exhibit showcasing Clara's motherhood-inspired series. Clara could hardly believe it. This opportunity was a beacon of hope, proof that she could stand on her own 2 feet, artistically and financially. In the weeks leading up to the exhibit, Clara poured her energy into creating her most personal paintings. Themes of rebirth, redemption, and maternal love dominated the canvases. She depicted silhouettes of mothers cradling their infants against dawn skies, phoenixes rising from ashes, a visual metaphor for her own transformation. Lucas often played at her feet, giggling and babbling as she worked. Whenever she felt a pang of self-doubt, she would look at him and remember why she had chosen this path. On the night of the exhibit's opening, a modest crowd gathered in Rose's gallery. The walls were lined with Clara's paintings, each radiating a sense of vulnerability and quiet strength. Jennifer Delgado was there, as was Margaret, who proudly told anyone within earshot, "That's my daughter's work." Among the guests was a familiar name, Meredith Walton, the influential gallery owner Clara had once tried to speak to at the charity banquet in Boston. Meredith had heard buzz about a raw, emotive collection by a rising artist and decided to attend. She introduced herself to Clara, this time with genuine interest. "Your work moves me," Meredith said. "There's honesty here that's rare in the art world." Clara felt her pulse quicken. She recalled how different things had been when Sabrina Marchant had overshadowed her in that humiliating conversation. Now she stood on her own, with her paintings speaking volumes. By the end of the evening, Meredith offered to collaborate, perhaps even connect Clara with larger galleries in New York. Clara agreed to stay in touch, feeling gratitude and excitement bloom within her. The success of the exhibit brought in sales, enough to allow Clara to upgrade her supplies and pay off some lingering medical bills from Lucas's birth. More importantly, it validated her decision to leave Alex and reclaim her life. Still, she couldn't escape a quiet sadness. She watched as other parents, particularly couples, strolled the gallery with their children. Lucas was happy, but he was missing something, a father figure. Clara had chosen to protect her son from an environment rife with humiliation and emotional neglect, but she wondered if she'd robbed him of the chance to know his dad. Each milestone in her success felt bittersweet, tinged with the memory of what once was. Yet for the first time, Clara felt truly alive, standing on her own merits. In her small corner of Philadelphia, with her son at her side, she was rising from the ashes of a broken marriage, forging her destiny with grace and determination. For Alex Sterling, life had continued in a superficial sense of triumph. He finalized a merger that doubled Sterling Industries' market share, earning him accolades from the business world. Lavish galas, black tie events, and high-stakes negotiations filled his calendar. To an outsider, it appeared he'd never been better. He was, after all, a multimillionaire still climbing the ranks of the ultra-wealthy. But beneath the polished exterior, Alex was haunted. Late at night, in the silence of his penthouse overlooking the city, he'd pour himself a glass of expensive scotch and stare at the city lights. His mind drifted to Clara, her laugh, her art, her unwavering gaze. He recalled how she used to rest her head on his shoulder, eyes closed, listening to the distant hum of traffic on the Schuylkill River. Now, every corner of his pristine home seemed devoid of warmth, filled only with the echoes of her absence. He'd received occasional updates from his lawyers about the baby boy, Lucas. Each time he felt a pang in his chest. His name was on the birth certificate. Clara hadn't contested that, but he had no relationship with his own son. Pride and shame kept him from reaching out. "She left me," he told himself. "She took my son with her." Yet a deeper truth gnawed at him. "I pushed her away." One evening, Alex received an unexpected phone call from Sabrina Marchant. She was in town and wanted to meet for drinks. Initially, Alex hesitated. He knew Sabrina had always harbored more than a friendly interest in him. But he was lonely, and a part of him yearned for any distraction from the persistent regret. They met at a swanky rooftop bar, sipping imported wine under the glow of city skyscrapers. Sabrina talked about her latest conquests in the venture capital world, flaunting her cunning deals and high-profile connections. After a few drinks, she leaned in closer, placing a manicured hand on Alex's arm. "You know, you're better off without that artist," she said with a dismissive sneer. "She was never one of us." A wave of revulsion swept through Alex. It struck him how those words he might have once silently agreed with, now felt hollow and cruel. He recalled the look on Clara's face when Sabrina had humiliated her in Boston, how, in that moment, he hadn't stood up for the woman he claimed to love. Guilt swirled in his gut. He realized he couldn't stomach Sabrina's condescension anymore. Downing the last of his drink, he stood up abruptly. "I have to go," he muttered, ignoring her puzzled expression. Back in his penthouse, he paced the floor, wrestling with memories of Clara. He found himself scrolling through old photos on his phone, a snapshot of them at a farmer's market, another where Clara was laughing at something silly he'd said. He stopped at a picture of Clara, pregnant, her eyes glowing with anticipation. "I'm sorry," he whispered to no one, a lump in his throat. Within days, Alex caved to the urge he'd been resisting for over a year. He dialed the number his lawyer had given him, Clara's personal cell. It went straight to voicemail. Nervously, he left a brief message, voice trembling slightly. "Clara, it's Alex. I'd like to see Lucas and talk, if you're open to that." He hung up, heart pounding. Nothing he owned, no car, no mansion, no business success, could quell the fear of her rejection. For the first time, he laid bare a vulnerability that he'd spent his whole life hiding. Would she answer his call, or would she protect her heart and their son from the man who had failed them so profoundly? Clara's phone buzzed on a windy evening as she hurried into her apartment with groceries and a squirming Lucas in tow. Setting the bags down, she glanced at the screen and felt her heart jump. Missed call from Alexander Sterling. Voicemail 1. She stood frozen, conflicting emotions swirling in her chest. It had been nearly 2 years since she'd heard his voice. She pressed play, listening to Alex stumble through an awkward request to see Lucas. A chaotic mix of anger, sadness, and a faint sense of relief flooded her. He finally called. For days, Clara couldn't decide whether to return his call. She discussed it with Margaret, who advised caution, but acknowledged that Lucas might someday want to know his father. Jennifer, ever the supportive friend, offered a listening ear, encouraging Clara to do what was best for herself and Lucas, without letting Alex's wealth or past hurt cloud her judgment. Ultimately, Clara opted to send Alex a text, keeping it brief and neutral. "I received your voicemail. We can talk about Lucas. Call me tomorrow at 7 p.m. Her hands trembled as she typed. She felt like she was opening a door she'd bolted shut long ago. The next evening, Clara waited in her living room, Lucas asleep in his crib. When her phone rang at exactly 7 p.m., she answered, heart thudding. "Clara," Alex began hesitantly, "thank you for taking my call." Silence stretched as she weighed her words. "I'm not sure what you want, but if you're serious about meeting Lucas, we need to establish some boundaries." Alex sounded nervous, a tone Clara had never heard before. I understand. I'd just like a chance to see my son, and to apologize." She considered the vulnerability in his voice. "All right, but I want it in a public place. I'll text you the details." They decided on a family-friendly cafe near Clara's apartment for Saturday afternoon. The days leading up to that meeting felt excruciatingly slow. Clara painted feverishly, trying to settle her restless mind. She reminded herself that this was for Lucas, not for any lingering feelings. Saturday arrived, crisp and sunny. Clara dressed Lucas in a soft blue sweater. He toddled around, babbling excitedly. She bundled him into the stroller and walked the few blocks to the cafe. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of freshly baked bread. She spotted Alex at a corner table, dressed in a casual jacket. No polished corporate suit, no entourage. He looked thinner, his hair slightly disheveled. When he saw them, he stood up, hands trembling at his sides. His eyes locked onto Lucas, who peered up at him curiously. Clara felt a pang in her chest when she noticed the glimmer of emotion in Alex's eyes, an unspoken regret and longing. "Hi," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex knelt down, meeting Lucas at eye level. "Hello, Lucas," he said gently. Lucas clung to Clara's leg, but stared at Alex with wide eyes. After a moment, Alex smiled tentatively, and to Clara's surprise, Lucas giggled. A wave of relief washed over Alex's face, as though he'd been granted permission to feel something he'd denied himself for too long. Thus began the first step toward an uncertain future. Their paths had collided once again, not as husband and wife, but as two people bound by a child, each carrying wounds that had yet to heal. The meeting at the cafe lasted over an hour. Clara sipped tea while Lucas, sitting in a high chair, snacked on crackers. Across the table, Alex's gaze shifted between his son and the woman he once called his wife. He tried to make small talk about Lucas's milestones, faltering in the face of Clara's guarded demeanor. Eventually, Clara found the courage to be direct. "Why now, Alex?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with vulnerability. "You ignored us when I was pregnant, during Lucas's birth, his first steps. Why reach out now?" Alex swallowed hard. "I've thought about calling you every day. I was too ashamed and too stubborn." He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I handled everything poorly, Clara. I know I can't change the past, but I want to be a part of Lucas's life, if you'll let me." She studied him, trying to decipher whether his remorse was genuine or just another flash of guilt that would fade. Alex's eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, and his usual confidence seemed replaced by an almost childlike anxiety. For a moment, Clara remembered the Alex she first fell in love with, the one who wasn't afraid to kneel on a university courtyard to pick up her scattered sketches. "You have to understand," she began, voice trembling with pent-up hurt. "I tried to fit into your world. I tried to be the person you wanted me to be, but all I got was humiliation, and you just stood there, or worse, you joined in." She felt tears prick her eyes, but she fought them back, not wanting to break down in a public place. "I left to protect myself and Lucas. I won't expose him to that kind of environment where we're never good enough." Alex nodded, remorse evident. "I can't take back the things I said or did, but I've cut ties with people like Sabrina. I've been re-evaluating everything in my life. The bigger the empire I built, the emptier I felt." He glanced at Lucas, who was now trying to shove a cracker into his mouth with clumsy toddler hands. Meeting him, "It's like seeing the part of me that could still be good." For a brief moment, time stood still. Clara recognized genuine regret, the kind that shifts a person from the inside out. Still, her trust in him was broken. She refused to make any immediate promises. "I'll think about letting you see Lucas more," she said, her voice measured. "But let's keep it slow. Visits in public places, no overnight stays yet. And if at any point I feel Lucas's well-being is compromised, I'll end it." Alex's shoulders sagged in relief. "Thank you," he breathed. They agreed to meet again. Clara packed up Lucas, who waved bye-bye in his toddler way. As she pushed the stroller out of the cafe, she felt an odd mixture of turmoil and cautious hope. She had confronted the man who had once broken her heart and left her carrying both a child and the weight of his disregard. Whether he could mend those wounds was uncertain, but for Lucas's sake, she was willing to try. In the following weeks, Alex slowly integrated himself into Lucas's life. The visits were sporadic at first, an hour at the park on a Saturday afternoon, or a quick lunch at a child-friendly restaurant. Clara watched him from a careful distance, observing how he interacted with their son. To her cautious surprise, Alex displayed genuine care. He pushed Lucas on the swing set, helped him learn new words by pointing at objects, tree, dog, sky, and even seemed entranced by Lucas's smallest gestures. The old arrogance that once defined him was largely absent. In its place was an awkwardness reminiscent of someone trying to make amends. Yet the road was anything but smooth. One afternoon, Alex appeared with a pricey remote-controlled car for Lucas. Clara immediately bristled. She pulled Alex aside. "He's two, Alex. He doesn't need something so extravagant," she said in a hushed, tense voice. Alex looked confused and slightly hurt. "I just wanted to give him a nice gift." Clara sighed, trying to calm her frustration. "He's a toddler. He values time and attention more than expensive gifts. Don't try to buy his affection." Alex's jaw tightened, but he nodded, placing the toy car aside. Clara recognized the tension in his expression. He was so used to solving problems with money. Part of her pitied him for not knowing another way. Slowly, she began to see that it wasn't just about Lucas. Alex was trying to learn to be a different man, and sometimes old habits died hard. Outside of these visits, Clara's life remained busy. Her artwork was gaining more recognition, and she juggled teaching at the community center with raising Lucas. Margaret visited often to babysit, giving Clara time to travel for potential gallery shows. On some nights, when Lucas was asleep, Clara would stare at her phone, half expecting a text from Alex. Though they spoke frequently about logistics, they never once delved into their relationship. Inevitably, the moment came when Alex asked, "Can I take Lucas to my place for a day?" He mentioned he'd baby-proofed his penthouse, ensuring every sharp corner and electrical outlet was secured. Clara hesitated. The idea of Lucas in the environment that had once suffocated her brought back painful memories, but she also sensed that keeping Lucas away forever wasn't fair to either of them. "All right," she said slowly, "but just for the afternoon, and I want to come with him the first time to make sure everything's okay." The day they visited Alex's penthouse, Clara felt a swirl of emotions. The modern decor, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, everything was painfully familiar and yet distant. She remembered countless nights here, feeling invisible, overshadowed by Alex's social circle. But this time, no crowd of wealthy friends awaited her. Instead, it was just Alex, who had a nervous energy about him as he greeted Lucas. She walked through the rooms, verifying that indeed the sharp corners were padded, the electrical sockets covered. The fridge was stocked with child-friendly snacks, and there was even a small corner filled with stuffed animals and building blocks. Alex had clearly made an effort. Despite the tension in the air, Clara was struck by a sense of possibility. People could change, given the chance and the will. She didn't know if she was ready to forgive Alex for all his past wrongs, but she recognized that he was trying. Maybe that counted for something. Nevertheless, she reminded herself, trust was a fragile vessel, easily shattered and painstakingly repaired. The question that lingered in her mind was whether their fractured bond could ever truly be mended. Months passed, and Alex became a regular part of Lucas's life. Saturdays were spent at the park or the children's museum. Wednesday afternoons, Alex would drop by the community center after Clara's classes ended, offering to help carry her supplies or simply watch Lucas color with crayons. Over time, Clara could see the bond forming between father and son. Yet the dynamics between the two adults remained fraught with unspoken feelings. Their conversations revolved around Lucas, his preschool options, his new favorite foods, the adorable drawings he made. They carefully skirted around their past relationship, though the tension between them was palpable. One rainy evening, after they had taken Lucas to a puppet show, Alex offered to drive Clara and Lucas home. Lucas dozed off in the back seat, lulled by the patter of raindrops on the window. As Alex pulled up in front of Clara's building, he hesitated. "Could I come up for a minute? I'd like to help put Lucas to bed, if that's okay." Clara bit her lip, torn. She finally nodded. "All right, but just for a minute." Inside, Alex gently carried Lucas to his small bedroom, tucking him into his toddler bed. He paused, gazing at the child's serene face. Clara stood in the doorway, arms folded, unsure how to handle this sudden intimacy. When Alex emerged, he lingered in the hallway, their eyes meeting in the dim glow of a nightlight. 1,000 emotions welled up in Clara: love, anger, hurt, longing. She opened her mouth to speak, but words failed her. Alex, too, seemed at a loss. Finally he sighed heavily. I'm sorry, Clara, for everything." His voice trembled. "Leaving you alone while you were pregnant, not defending you when you needed it most. If I could go back—" "You can't," Clara interrupted, her voice steady. "Neither of us can change the past." Silence enveloped them, punctuated only by Lucas's soft breathing. Clara tried to remain composed, but tears gathered in her eyes. "You broke my trust, Alex. You let others treat me like I was nothing, and you treated me that way too." Alex reached out tentatively, but he didn't touch her. "I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." His eyes glistened under the faint light. "But I also know that I want to be here, with you and Lucas, in any way you'll let me." A storm of conflicting emotions roared within her. She was exhausted from carrying the weight of betrayal for so long. She had built walls to protect herself, but now those walls were trembling. She let out a shaky breath. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again the way I once did," she admitted, her voice cracking. "I'll earn it back," he promised, a determined softness to his tone, "even if it takes years." They stood there, hearts raw and exposed, two broken souls trying to find a way forward. In that moment, Clara felt an odd sense of comfort in his presence. Despite the pain, there was still a spark, faint and wounded, but alive. She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Then keep showing up, for Lucas, for me. We'll see where that leads." Alex pressed his lips together, fighting back his own tears. "I will." And so they ended the night not with a passionate reunion, but with a promise to try. Sometimes the path to mended hearts begins not with a grand gesture, but with small steps born of genuine remorse and cautious hope. Over the next year, the delicate dance between Clara and Alex continued. Their progress was marked not by dramatic declarations, but by incremental shifts in how they treated each other, how they learned to co-parent, and how they faced the remnants of their shared past. Alex began attending Lucas's preschool events. At first, he would sit in the back row, cautious not to overstep, while Clara hovered protectively near their son. Over time, teachers and other parents grew used to seeing them together, albeit not as a traditional couple. Lucas's face lit up whenever both Mommy and Daddy appeared at the same event. The child's obvious joy pulled them closer in ways neither anticipated. Clara's art career continued to blossom. Her exhibit with Meredith Walton in New York was a modest triumph, garnering positive reviews in a few reputable art magazines. She found herself being commissioned for bespoke pieces, portraits, custom murals, and even a collaboration with a local non-profit to create a mural depicting family unity in a struggling community. Through her art, she channeled not just her pain, but also her healing. Alex, for his part, made conspicuous efforts to distance himself from his former social circle. He resigned from exclusive clubs where Sabrina Marchant and Greg Ridley reigned supreme, opting instead to invest his time and capital in philanthropic ventures. He funded scholarships at community art centers. He launched an initiative to develop affordable housing in Philadelphia's underserved neighborhoods. Though part of his motivation was altruistic, another part was personal. He wanted to become a man worthy of Clara's forgiveness, or at least her respect. In time, Alex also reached out to Margaret, inviting her over for a cordial lunch. The conversation was polite, laced with the awkwardness of two people who had once been family and were now working toward mutual understanding. Margaret was cautious but civil, recognizing that Alex was, indeed, making an effort to atone. An unexpected twist came when Clara was invited to showcase her work at a high-end art festival. The venue, a sprawling estate in Napa Valley, a location that stirred memories of her ill-fated wedding. When she hesitated to accept, Meredith Walton encouraged her to embrace the opportunity. "Your art deserves that stage, Clara. Don't let old wounds rob you of new victories." After weighing her options, Clara agreed, deciding that facing her painful memories might help her move forward. As the festival date approached, she learned the estate hosting the event was none other than one owned by the Marchant family. Sabrina was rumored to be involved in the festival's planning. The prospect of seeing her again made Clara's stomach churn, but she pushed aside her discomfort in favor of professionalism. Alex found out about the show and, without hesitation, offered to accompany Clara and Lucas for support. At first, she refused. She didn't want any drama overshadowing her art. But as the date loomed, Clara recognized that having Alex there to watch Lucas would free her to focus on her exhibit. Reluctantly, she agreed. When they arrived in Napa, the air was thick with tension. The vineyard sprawled across rolling hills, the vines heavy with ripening grapes. Clara couldn't help but recall her wedding day, the same sweet scent of grapes in the air, the same manicured rose. This time, instead of wearing a bridal gown, she wore a simple linen dress, splattered with paint. In her arms was a portfolio of new pieces, reflective of her evolution, both as an artist and a person. She quickly set up her station. The festival drew in wealthy patrons, gallery owners from across the country, and socialites who loved to flaunt their taste for culture. Among them was Sabrina Marchant, who glided through the crowd in a sleek designer dress, exuding the same arrogant confidence as ever. Sabrina paused at Clara's display, her gaze flicking over the paintings with a detached curiosity. "You've improved," she remarked, a note of patronizing surprise in her voice. "I suppose motherhood can inspire creativity in some women." Clara steadied her breath, determined not to let Sabrina's condescension unravel her composure. Before Clara could respond, Alex stepped into view, Lucas in tow. The sight of Alex beside Clara seemed to jolt Sabrina, her usual cool demeanor cracking for a moment. She plastered on a grin. "Alex, darling, I didn't expect to see you here, and with the family no less." Lucas sensed the tension and clung to Clara's leg. Alex, voice calm but firm, replied, "I'm here to support Clara. This is her show." Sabrina's eyebrows rose. "Is that so? Well, how domestic of you." Her gaze drifted to Clara's ringless hand, a smirk playing on her lips as though to remind them all of the past humiliation. Clara felt the old sting, but she met Sabrina's gaze evenly. "Thank you for hosting such a wonderful festival," she said politely, refusing to be goaded into conflict. She reminded herself that she was no longer the shy, easily intimidated woman Sabrina had once belittled. After an awkward silence, Sabrina retreated to mingle with other guests. Alex placed a reassuring hand on Clara's shoulder. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Clara nodded, exhaling. "Yes, I am." She realized the words felt true. She was okay. Seeing Sabrina no longer held the power to devastate her, she'd grown stronger, armed with self-worth and the knowledge that her art and her life could stand on its own. As the festival progressed, Clara's booth attracted genuine interest. A few collectors expressed intent to purchase her paintings. One of them was a famous musician, evidently struck by the raw emotion in her work. Another was a seasoned art curator from San Francisco, who invited Clara to join a group exhibition. By the end of the day, Clara had sold 3 of her pieces, netting more in a single afternoon than she used to earn in a month. She felt a dizzying mix of pride and humility. When Lucas raised his arms, demanding to be carried, Clara scooped him up and kissed his cheek. This was the life she'd fought for, a balance of motherhood, artistic fulfillment, and emotional independence. Alex, who had been standing by with a quiet smile, approached after the curator left. "Congratulations," he said. "I'm proud of you." Something about his tone made Clara look up. She saw tears brimming in his eyes, tears of genuine admiration. For a moment she felt the rush of old emotions, how she once believed in a future with this man, yet she also remembered the heartbreak he'd caused. Still, she allowed herself a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she replied. "That means a lot." That evening they attended a private reception for participating artists. Lucas stayed at the hotel with a trusted babysitter. Guests mingled under strings of fairy lights, sipping wine and sampling canapes. The afterglow of her successful day lingered around Clara, giving her a buoyant confidence. Alex hovered near her, engaging in light conversation about her artwork. When the event ended, they found themselves walking along a moonlit path between the grapevines, the night air fragrant with ripe fruit. Soft music floated from the distance, and the sky was ablaze with stars. Clara paused by a wooden fence, gazing out at the vineyard under the silver glow of the moon. The memories of her wedding day, of humiliations endured in this very environment, resurfaced. Yet, this time, she didn't feel the crushing weight of those memories. Instead, she felt a quiet release, as if the vineyard's night breeze carried away the last remnants of her pain. Alex stood beside her, hands in his pockets. "I've been thinking," he said softly, "about how much has changed since we were here last. How much I've changed." She turned to him, caught off guard by his earnestness. He continued, voice tremulous. "I was so blind, Clara. Obsessed with proving myself, with living up to my father's expectations. I didn't realize I was stomping on the very love that gave my life meaning." Clara's throat tightened. "We both made choices," she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "I'm grateful for Lucas, but the pain we went through, sometimes it still feels so fresh." Alex nodded. "I know it's not something we can just forget, but I want you to know that I'm willing to spend the rest of my life making amends, if that's what it takes." Silence enveloped them, punctuated by the quiet hum of insects in the vineyard. Slowly, tentatively, Alex reached for Clara's hand. She didn't pull away. The warmth of his touch sent a cascade of emotions through her: regret, longing, affection, and an ever-present caution. She looked down at their hands, remembering how once upon a time their fingers entwined so naturally. "I don't know if we can ever go back to how we were," she whispered, tears threatening to spill. "I'm not asking to go back," Alex said. "I want to move forward, start anew, if we can. Even if it's just as co-parents who respect each other. But if there's a chance, even the slightest possibility, that we can rebuild something, I want that chance." Clara let out a shaky breath. "I'm scared. Our history it's messy." He nodded, eyes glimmering. "I'm scared too, but it's a good kind of fear, like stepping onto a stage to perform something meaningful." She closed her eyes, letting the moment sink in. The memory of his earlier betrayals was still there, but so was this raw, honest version of Alex, who had spent the past year proving that he could be better. She had seen him cradle Lucas with care, volunteer at the community center, support her art career without overshadowing it, apologize to Margaret, actions that spoke louder than any words. When she opened her eyes, she found him watching her, breath held. She gave the faintest nod, exhaling softly. Let's see where this goes, one step at a time. A tear slipped down Alex's cheek and he gently brushed it away, a soft laugh escaping his lips. He pulled her into a careful embrace, as though he might scare her off if he held on too tight. She rested her head against his shoulder, inhaling the faint scent of his cologne, mixed with the sweet vineyard air. In that quiet moment, they weren't the broken couple they once were. They were two people forging a path toward redemption and, possibly, rediscovering love. In the months that followed, Clara and Alex navigated a new phase of their relationship. They saw a counselor together to address their past traumas, learned how to communicate without letting bitterness devour them. They fell into a rhythm of co-parenting that gradually blossomed into genuine partnership, and then something deeper. Their reconciliation didn't happen overnight. Clara insisted on maintaining her independence. She refused to move back into Alex's penthouse until she was certain this was what she wanted, not just what felt familiar. Alex respected her wishes, suggesting only that he spend more time in her apartment so Lucas wouldn't have to shuttle between two homes constantly. In the years to come, they built a life grounded in shared purpose. Clara opened her own art studio, mentoring young artists who faced financial barriers, much like she had in her youth. Alex continued to expand his philanthropic work, pouring resources into educational programs and community developments. Lucas grew up surrounded by a blend of creativity and compassion, learning that success meant more than money. It meant empathy, perseverance, and the courage to rectify one's mistakes. On quiet evenings, Clara and Alex often sat together in her studio. She painted, and he read or tinkered with business proposals on a tablet. Every so often he would glance up, catching her eye with a smile that said, "I'm grateful." She would smile back, painting a bright new stroke of color that symbolized hope on a canvas that was once filled with sorrow. And that, perhaps, was the truest form of a happy ending. Not a perfect life, but a real one, where two flawed individuals, bound by love and redemption, found the courage to forgive, to grow, and to create a future that honored the pains of the past without being defined by them. They had learned that sometimes the greatest fortune in the world lies not in riches or social standing, but in the fragile, resilient connection between two hearts, and the child who made their love story worth saving. And so, Clara and Alex's journey wasn't about rewriting the past. It was about rebuilding the future, one step at a time. From betrayal to redemption, from heartbreak to healing, they discovered that true love isn't just about grand gestures or second chances. It's about growth, accountability, and the courage to make things right. But what do you think? Can love truly conquer all? Would you have given Alex another chance, or was Clara's decision too forgiving? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful tale. There are more stories coming, filled with drama, twists, and life lessons that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a good redemption story, and I'll see you in the next one.